I never believed in fairy tales until the night I saved a prince and disappeared into the rain like some kind of ghost. My name is Serafina Delacroix, but everyone calls me Sierra, and this is the story of how an obese poor girl from the streets of New Orleans learned that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the most ordinary people. You know? Before I tell you about that night, about the rain and the rescue and the boy who would turn my world upside down, I need you to understand who I was before all of this happened. Because the girl who jumped into that canal wasn't brave or heroic, or any of the things people imagine when they hear this story. She was just broken enough to think her life didn't matter. And that's a very different kind of courage. If you've ever been the fat kid, you know what I'm talking about. If you've ever walked into a room and felt every eye turn away from you. If you've ever eaten lunch alone while listening to whispers about your weight. If you've ever looked in the mirror and wished you could disappear completely, then you understand the particular kind of invisible I had become by the time I turned 17. Picture a 17-year-old girl who weighed nearly 250 pounds, whose school uniform never fit right, because the largest size they sold still strained against my body. Picture someone who had learned to eat lunch in bathroom stalls, because the cafeteria felt like a gladiator arena where I was always the one thrown to the lions. I lived with my grandmère Celestine in the Marigny, the forgotten corner of New Orleans, where broken dreams settle like sediment, where the paint peels from shotgun houses like old skin, and where the smell of poverty mingles with the aroma of red beans and rice cooking on every stove. This is where people like me learn to survive, not live, but it's also where magic lives in the spaces between heartbreak and hope. Our house was a classic Creole shotgun style, painted butter yellow with sky blue trim, colors that made you smile, even on the grayest days. Grandmère had turned our tiny living room into a shrine to our ancestors, with photographs of relatives whose stories I knew by heart. We come from warriors, Sierra Grandmère would tell me every morning as I drank my café au lait. Women who fought pirates and hurricanes, and men who thought they could own us. That strength is in you too, child. Just because you can't see it yet doesn't mean it's not there. But sitting in first period English at Benjamin Franklin High School, listening to Madison Thibodeau and her friends whisper about my thunder thighs and cottage cheese arms, it was hard to feel like I came from warriors. It was hard to feel like anything other than a mistake. That everyone was too polite to correct directly. The rain was coming down like bullets that October night, each drop hitting the cracked pavement of Marigny Street with a violence that only New Orleans storms know how to deliver. I was running through the downpour, clutching a small paper bag against my chest like it contained the crown jewels. Inside that bag were my grandmother's diabetes medications, pills that cost more than most people in my neighborhood make in a week. But without them, Grandmère would die, and she was the only family I had left in this world. Grandmère had been rationing her insulin for 3 weeks, taking half doses and hoping it would be enough to keep her blood sugar stable until we could afford to refill her prescription. But that afternoon, she had collapsed in the kitchen while making dinner. Her skin gray and clammy, her breathing shallow and rapid. I had spent the last of our grocery money on those pills, had convinced Mr. Tran at the pharmacy to let me pay half now and half next week. The storm had come out of nowhere, turning the streets into rivers, and the old drainage system was completely overwhelmed. I was cutting through the empty lot behind the old Creole grocery store when I heard it. A scream that cut through the thunder like a knife through butter. It was coming from the direction of the drainage canal. And there was something in that voice that reached past all my fears and grabbed hold of something primal in my chest. Help. Somebody help me, please. Have you ever heard a sound that stops your heart? That makes every cell in your body freeze with recognition that someone is about to die? That's what I heard that night. A voice calling for help with a desperation that spoke of seconds, not minutes, before it would be silenced forever. I should have kept running. Any smart person would have. But I dropped the medicine bag under a covered entrance and ran toward the screams. When I reached the canal, my blood turned to ice water. There, in the churning brown water that was rushing toward the lake, I saw him, a young man, maybe a year or two older than me, fighting against a current that was determined to drag him under. He was beautiful, even half drowned and terrified. The kind of beautiful that makes you understand why people write songs and start VHL wars. Dark hair plastered against a face that looked like it had been carved by angels' eyes. The color of the Gulf of Mexico on a clear day. His clothes looked expensive, the kind of fabric that cost more than my entire wardrobe. But expensive clothes don't help when you're drowning, and this boy was going under fast. I didn't think. If I had thought, I would have realized that I was probably the worst person in New Orleans to attempt a water rescue. I was overweight, out of shape, and had never been a particularly strong swimmer. But sometimes the heart moves faster than the brain. And before I knew it, I was kicking off my shoes and jumping into that hellish water. The cold hit me like a physical blow, knocking the breath from my lungs. The current was stronger than I had anticipated, immediately trying to sweep me away, just like it was doing to him. But I had grown up in these streets, playing in these very canals during the dry summers when we were kids. I knew how the water moved, where the dangerous spots were, how to use the current instead of fighting it. Swimming toward him was like swimming through liquid concrete. Every stroke was a battle against the rushing water, against my own body that wasn't built for this kind of effort, against the voice in my head that was screaming that I was about to die, trying to save someone who would never even notice me under normal circumstances. When I reached him, he was barely conscious, his face gray with exhaustion and hypothermia. "Hold on to me," I gasped, wrapping my arm around his chest. "Don't fight me, just let me do the work." He was heavier than I expected, his waterlogged clothes dragging us both down. For a terrifying moment, I thought we were both going to die there in that dirty water. But Grandmere had always told me that we Delacroix women were stronger than we looked, that we carried the power of our ancestors in our blood. "When you think you can't go on," she had said, "call on the women who came before you. They will give you strength you didn't know you had." So I called on them. I called on every woman in my bloodline who had ever faced impossible odds and found a way to survive. And somehow, impossibly, I found the strength I needed. Using every technique I had learned as a kid, I angled us toward the concrete embankment, using the current to help instead of hinder. It took every ounce of strength I possessed. My lungs burned, my muscles screamed in protest, and my heart pounded so hard I thought it might explode. But somehow, incredibly, I managed to get us to safety. Getting him out of the water was another nightmare entirely. He was unconscious by then, dead. Weight that felt like it was made of lead by the time I got him up onto solid ground. I was sobbing with exhaustion and relief. He was breathing, thank God, but barely conscious. I rolled him onto his side and watched as he coughed up what seemed like half the canal. His skin was pale and cold, lips blue with hypothermia. As I knelt there beside him, reality started to creep back in. This boy was not from my world. Everything about him screamed money and privilege. When he woke up, what would he see? Would he be grateful? Or would he take one look at my overweight body, my worn-out clothes, and assume I was trying to rob him? But as I started to stand up, something caught my eye. My bracelet, the one Grandmere had made for me when I turned 16, had come loose during the rescue. It was made of small glass beads in the traditional Haitian style, blue and white and red, with tiny charms that were supposed to bring protection and love. The bracelet had fallen onto his chest, the colorful beads bright against his pale shirt. For a moment I reached for it, then stopped. Let him have it, I thought. Let him have something to remember this night. To remember that someone cared enough to risk everything to save him. I could hear sirens in the distance. It was time for me to go. But, as I started to turn away, he stirred slightly, and for just a moment, his eyes fluttered open. They were green, I realized, the deep green of the Gulf on a calm day. "Angel," he whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "Are you an angel?" My heart stopped completely. Then his eyes rolled back and he was unconscious again, and I knew I had to leave before the paramedics arrived. I took one last look at his face, memorizing features that I knew I would never see again, except in my dreams. Then I ran. The next morning dawned clear and bright, and I got dressed for school, trying to pretend that the night before had been a dream. But when I walked into first period English class, I knew it hadn't been, because sitting in the front row, with his arm in a sling and a bandage on his forehead, was the boy from the water. Étienne Beauregard, I learned when the teacher called his name. And when he turned around to scan the classroom, I saw my bracelet there on his wrist. The blue and red and white beads bright against his pale skin. My heart stopped. He was looking for someone, his eyes searching each face with an intensity that made my stomach flutter with hope and terror. When his gaze passed over me, I held my breath, waiting for recognition. But his eyes moved on without pausing, seeing right through me, as if I were invisible. Of course, he didn't recognize me. In the water, in the dark and the rain, I had been just a shadowy figure. Now, in the harsh fluorescent light of the classroom, I was just another fat girl in the back row. Someone not worth noticing, but he kept that bracelet on all day. I watched him during lunch, when he sat with the popular kids, expensive clothes and perfect hair and easy laughter. He kept touching the bracelet, studying the beads as if they contained some secret message. And I knew he was looking for the girl who had saved him. If you've ever loved someone from a distance, someone so far out of your league that you might as well be living on different planets, then you know the particular kind of torture I was experiencing. Every day for the next 3 weeks, I watched Étienne search for his mysterious savior. I heard him asking other students. Saw him posting flyers offering a reward for information about the girl who had saved his life. And every day I said nothing. How could I look at me? I wanted to say, do I look like someone who could save anyone? The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. I had saved the life of the most beautiful boy in school, and he was desperately trying to find me to thank me. But I was so convinced of my own unworthiness that I couldn't bring myself to speak up. Instead, I fell in love with him more each day. I learned his schedule, his habits, discovered that he was planning to study medicine at Tulane, that he volunteered at the Children's Hospital on weekends. He wasn't just beautiful. He was kind and intelligent, and everything I had ever dreamed of in a person. But dreams are dangerous things for girls like me. They make you forget your place, make you think that maybe you deserve more than what life has given you. 3 weeks after that stormy night, I was walking home from the library when I saw him outside the community center, talking to Mrs. Boudreau, who ran the after-school program. He had a stack of flyers in his hand, and I could hear him saying, "I just want to thank her. She saved my life, and I don't even know her name." Mrs. Boudreau examined my bracelet and said, "This was definitely made by Celestine Delacroix. She lives just a few blocks from here, on Ursuline Street." This was it. This was the moment when my secret would be revealed. Part of me wanted to run, but a bigger part of me was frozen with the terrible, wonderful possibility that maybe this was meant to happen. Have you ever stood at the edge of a cliff and felt the pull of gravity? That's what it felt like to push through that crowd and make myself visible. "Wait," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You don't need to go to her house." Étienne turned toward me, confusion in his expression as he placed me as the girl from his English class. "Do you know something about this bracelet?" he asked. Every eye in the crowd was on me now. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding. But I thought about Grandmere and the strength she said ran in our blood. "I know who it belongs to," I said, my voice gaining strength. "It's mine." The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the crowd staring at me, could see the confusion and disbelief in their faces. A fat girl like me, claiming to be the hero who had saved the prince. Étienne looked like someone had told him that the sky was purple. "This bracelet belonged to the girl who saved my life. She pulled me out of the drainage canal." "I know," I said, taking a step closer, "because I was there. I was the one who pulled you out." The crowd erupted in whispers. I heard someone say, "That can't be right. Look at her." Another voice added, "She's too fat to be a swimmer." But I forced myself to keep looking at Étienne, to focus on the one person whose opinion actually mattered. "You were wearing a hoodie," he said slowly, and I felt my heart jump, because this was recognition. "It was gray, and you were soaking wet dark gray," I confirmed. "With a zipper that was broken. You told me not to fight you," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "You said to let you do the work, and you called me an angel," I whispered. The effect was instantaneous. Étienne's eyes widened with shock and recognition, and the bracelet slipped from his fingers to land on the sidewalk. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. "It was you," he breathed, wonder in his voice. "You're the one who saved me." The crowd pressed closer, everyone talking at once, but Étienne seemed to realize we needed privacy. "Can we talk somewhere private?" he asked. "There's so much I want to say to you." As we walked toward my house, I watched him take in my neighborhood for the first time. The houses were smaller than he was used to, the paint more faded, the yards less manicured. When we reached our butter yellow house, Grandmere was sitting on the front porch. She looked up, and her eyes went wide when she saw me walking with a boy she didn't recognize. "Grandmere," I called, "this is Étienne, the boy I told you about." Understanding dawned in her ancient eyes, and she stood to greet us properly. Despite her small stature, there was something regal about the way she carried herself. "So you're the one," she said to Étienne, looking him up and down, "the one my granddaughter risked her life to save." "Yes, ma'am," Étienne replied with genuine respect, "and I've been looking for her ever since, trying to find a way to thank her properly. And now that you've found her, what do you plan to do about it?" "I'd like to get to know her," he said simply. "She saved my life, but more than that, she's incredible." I can't believe I've been sitting in the same classroom with her for weeks, without really seeing her. Grandmère invited him in for coffee, and soon we were sitting around our little kitchen table with steaming cups of café au lait. The inside of our house was humble, with its mismatched furniture and thrift store decorations, but Gran had always had a gift for making any space feel warm and welcoming. "Tell me about that night," Étienne said, his green eyes focused intently on my face, so I told him everything. About rushing to get Grandmère's medicine, about hearing his cries for help, about making the split-second decision to jump into that raging water. As I talked, I watched his expression change from amazement to something deeper, something that looked almost like awe. "You could have died," he said when I finished. "Why did you do it? Why did you risk everything for a stranger?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "I just heard you calling for help, and I couldn't walk away. I couldn't live with myself if I had let you drown when there was a chance I could save you. It doesn't matter who you were," I continued. "In that moment, you were just someone who needed help, and if you have the power to help someone, then I think you have to try." Étienne was quiet for a long moment. "I've been thinking about that night every day since it happened. Not just because I almost died, but because of you." "Because of what you did?" "I've never met anyone like you before." "Someone fat, you mean?" I asked, the words coming out more bitter than I had intended. "Someone brave," he corrected immediately. "Someone selfless, someone who would risk her own life for a complete stranger without expecting anything in return." The compliment hit me like a physical blow, so unexpected and genuine that I didn't know how to respond. I had spent so many years being defined by my weight that I had forgotten there might be other ways to be valuable. "I kept your bracelet," he continued, pulling it out of his pocket. "I know I should give it back to you, but it's the only thing I had to remind me that you were real." "Keep it," I said impulsively. "If it means something to you, then keep it." "It brought you to me," I added, surprising myself with my boldness. "That makes it the most magical thing I've ever owned." The smile that spread across his face was like watching the sun rise over the Gulf. Warm and brilliant and absolutely breathtaking. But then his phone rang, jarring us back to reality. It was his mother, and I could hear the formality in his voice when he answered. "Yes, Mother, I'm fine." "No, I'm not at home. I'm visiting a friend." "What do you mean? What kind of friend?" "She's just a friend." "Mother, does it matter?" He had to leave for family dinner, but before he went, he turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Sira," he said, "would you like to have lunch with me tomorrow?" "At school, I mean, just the two of us." The invitation was so unexpected that I could only stare at him in shock. "I'd like that," I managed to say. The next morning, I spent an hour getting ready for school, wanting to look my best for my lunch with Étienne. But as I approached the school, I began to notice groups of students talking in low voices and glancing in my direction. Word had gotten out about yesterday's revelation, and the entire school was buzzing with gossip. When I reached my locker, Madison Thibodeau and her friends were waiting for me. "Well, well," Madison said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, "if it isn't our very own superhero. Tell me, Sira, how exactly did you manage to rescue someone when you can barely climb a flight of stairs without getting winded?" But before I could respond, a familiar voice cut through their laughter. "Is there a problem here?" Étienne approached our group, his expression cold and dangerous. Madison's demeanor changed instantly, her sneer transforming into a brilliant smile. "Étienne, we were just talking to Sira about her little adventure story." "Adventure story?" His voice was deadly quiet. "This whole fantasy about rescuing you from the canal. I mean, really, does she look like someone who could save anyone?" The silence that followed was complete. Étienne looked from Madison to me, and for a horrible moment, I thought he might actually agree with her instead. He stepped closer to Madison, radiating barely controlled fury. "Let me make something very clear," he said, his voice carrying to the growing crowd. "Sarah Delacroix saved my life 3 weeks ago. She risked everything to pull me out of that water when she didn't even know who I was. She's the bravest, most selfless person I've ever met, and anyone who says otherwise is either jealous or too stupid to recognize a hero when they see one." Madison's face went pale, then bright red, as she realized her attempt to humiliate me had backfired spectacularly. As we walked toward the cafeteria together, I could feel every eye in the school following us. The cafeteria fell silent when we entered, and Étienne led me to an empty table by the windows, pulling out my chair like I was someone important. "This is nice," he said, sitting down across from me with that smile that made me forget how to breathe. I've been looking forward to this all morning. As we talked over our lunches, I began to understand why he had been so eager to find me. It wasn't just gratitude, it was something deeper, a connection that went beyond the circumstances of our meeting. He told me about his life in the Garden District, about the pressure to be perfect and the expectations that came with his family name. He talked about feeling like he was living someone else's life. That night in the water, he said, his voice growing serious, I thought I was going to die. I was so scared and so alone, and then suddenly you were there. You didn't care that I was rich or poor, handsome or ugly. You just saw someone who needed help, and you helped. It was the purest thing I've ever experienced. You see me, Sarah, he continued, leaning forward with intensity. Not my family name or my bank account. You see, the real me. Do you know how rare that is? But our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of someone I had hoped never to encounter. Victoria Beauregard swept into the cafeteria like a force of nature. Her designer clothes and perfect makeup making her look like she had stepped out of a magazine. Étienne, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent cafeteria. I need to speak with you now. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Étienne's face went pale, and I could see him struggling between protecting our conversation and his ingrained obedience to his mother. Mother, he said, standing up slowly. This is Sarah Delacroix, the girl I told you about yesterday. Victoria Beauregard turned her cold blue eyes on me, and I felt like a bug being examined under a microscope. Her gaze traveled from my face, to my body, to my clothes, cataloging every imperfection. So you're the one, she said, her voice dripping with disdain, the one who's been filling my son's head with romantic nonsense about heroes and rescues. Mother, please, Étienne said, embarrassment and anger straining his voice. But she wasn't finished. She moved closer to our table, her presence poisonous. Let me explain something to you, Miss Delacroix, she said, her voice low but caring. I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but it ends now. My son is destined for great things, and I won't allow some little nobody from the projects to derail his future with delusions of grandeur. The words hit me like physical blows, each one designed to cut and wound and remind me of my place in the world. That's enough, Étienne said, his voice shaking with fury. How dare you speak to her like that? I'll speak to her however I please, Victoria replied sharply. And you'll remember who you are and where you come from before you embarrass this family any further. She turned back to me, and her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. I'm sure you're a very nice girl, she said with false sweetness. But you must understand that this little infatuation of my son's is just gratitude, mixed with adolescent rebellion. Save yourself the heartbreak and walk away now, before you get hurt. Victoria Beauregard had shown me exactly what I was up against, exactly what loving her son would cost me. She had reminded me of a truth I had tried to forget, that love might be colorblind and weight-blind and class-blind, but the world wasn't. I stood up slowly, gathering the tattered remains of my dignity around me like armor. She's right, I said, quietly, my voice steady, despite the fact that my heart was breaking. This was a mistake. I should have stayed invisible. I walked away, leaving behind the first boy who had ever made me feel beautiful, the first person who had ever seen me as a hero instead of a burden. But as I reached the cafeteria doors, I heard footsteps behind me. Sarah, wait. Please, just wait. I stopped but didn't turn around, because I knew that if I looked at his face again, I would lose what little resolve I had left. Don't listen to her, he said, his voice breaking. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She doesn't know you like I do. But she knows you, I replied without turning around. And she knows your world. This can't work, Étienne. We're from different planets. No, he said, and I could hear him moving closer. You're not foolish, and this isn't over. I don't care what my mother thinks or what anyone else thinks. You saved my life, Sarah. You made me feel like I was worth saving. I'm not going to let anyone take that away from us. His words were everything I wanted to hear, but wanting something and being able to have it were two entirely different things. But then something unexpected happened. As I stood there in that hallway, feeling like my world was ending, I heard Grandmere's voice in my head. That same strength is in you, Sarah, that same fire. The Loa don't make mistakes, child. And suddenly, I was angry. Furious, actually. Who was Victoria Beauregard to tell me I wasn't worthy of love? Who was she to decide that my heart wasn't good enough for her son? I had saved Étienne's life, had risked everything for him when I didn't even know his name. If that didn't make me worthy, then nothing would. I turned around slowly, and when I saw Étienne's face, saw the pain and determination there, something inside me shifted. "You're right," I said, my voice stronger than it had been all day. "This isn't over. Your mother doesn't get to decide what we are or what we could be. Only we get to decide that." The smile that spread across his face was like watching hope itself come to life. What followed was the hardest and most beautiful year of my life. Étienne stood up to his family, to their expectations, to their prejudices. He faced down his mother's anger and his father's disappointment, and the social pressure from their elite circle. And through it all, he never wavered in his belief that what we had was worth fighting for. I had to find my own strength too. I had to learn to believe that I was worthy of love, that my size didn't determine my value, that my circumstances didn't define my potential. With Étienne's support and Grandmere's wisdom, I began to see myself the way they saw me, as someone brave and kind and beautiful in all the ways that truly mattered. I started taking better care of myself, not because I wanted to change who I was, but because I wanted to be healthy enough to live the life I was building. I lost some weight, gained confidence, and discovered that when you believe in yourself, the world starts to believe in you too. Étienne helped me get a scholarship to study nursing at Tulane, and I helped him understand that true privilege wasn't about money or status, but about having the power to help others. Together, we learned that love wasn't about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone perfect for you. The day we graduated from college, Étienne took me back to the drainage canal where we had first met. The water was calm that day, reflecting the clear blue sky like a mirror. "This is where my life really began," he said, taking my hand. "Not when I was born into privilege, but when you showed me what real courage looked like." He got down on one knee right there beside that canal, pulling out a ring that was simple and beautiful and perfect. "Sarah Delacroix," he said, "will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life loving you and learning from you, and being grateful that I was drowning that night so you could save me?" I said yes, of course. How could I not? This was my fairy tale, the one I had never dared to believe in, but that had found me anyway. We were married a year later in Grandmere's backyard, surrounded by both our families and friends from both our worlds. Victoria Beauregard was there, having finally come to understand that her son's happiness mattered more than her prejudices. She never became my biggest fan, but she learned to respect the woman who had saved her son's life and who made him happier than she had ever seen him. As I write this, 5 years later, I'm Dr. Étienne Beauregard, working as a nurse in the same hospital where Étienne practices medicine. We live in a house that's bigger than the one I grew up in, but not so big that we forget where we came from. Grandmere lives with us now, teaching our daughter the same lessons about strength and courage that she taught me. People sometimes ask me what the secret is to our marriage, how a love story that seemed so impossible worked out in the end. The answer is simple. Love isn't about being perfect or having perfect circumstances. It's about seeing someone's heart and choosing to honor it. No matter what the world tries to tell you about worth or value or who deserves what. That night, in the canal, I thought I was saving Étienne's life. What I didn't realize was that he was saving mine too. He taught me that I was worthy of love, that my size didn't determine my value, that being different wasn't the same as being less than. If you're reading this and you're struggling with your own sense of worth, if you feel invisible or unlovable or like you don't belong, I want you to know that you do. You matter, your heart matters, your story matters, and somewhere out there is someone who will see your true worth, who will love you not despite who you are, but because of who you are. Sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the most ordinary people. Sometimes angels come in unexpected packages. And sometimes, just sometimes, the person who thinks they're saving someone else is actually the one being saved. Have you ever felt invisible? Have you ever thought you weren't worthy of love? If you have, please know that you're not alone, and you're not invisible to everyone. Your story is still being written, and the best chapters might be yet to come. Don't give up on your fairy tale, because sometimes they're real, and sometimes they find you when you least expect them. Remember to believe in your own worth, because you are worthy of every good thing this world has to offer. And if you enjoyed hearing about my love story, please share it with someone who might need to hear that fairy tales can come true for anyone, no matter what they look like or where they come from. Love is real, hope is real, and you are enough exactly as you are.